Others continued their migration north through the pass.
This hazardous route through the Caucasus Mountains is thought to be the one taken by the descendants of the Lost Tribes in their journey round the Black Sea. Before the First World War, Reginald Pierce was confidential secretary to the North Caucasian Oil Company in Grozny, where he became a fluent writer and speaker in Russian. When the war began, he volunteered for service in the British Army, but was instead sent back to Russia, where he was attached to the Don Cossacks on military intelligence duties, rising to the rank of colonel. His experience in working with the Russians in the Caucasus gave him unique access and insight into this strategically important part of the world. In 1937, he wrote an article which appeared in the National Message magazine, in which he said, "It has been my good fortune upon several occasions to travel through the Caucasus Mountains, taking the route of the Georgian Road. This is one of the two highways through the mountains from south to north, and is known in native legendary and song as the Pass of Israel."
Well, after a quite dramatic ascent, here we are at the top of the mountain. This is as high as it gets. Down there is the Dariel Gorge.
Colonel Pierce went on to observe that having passed successfully over this, the real ridge of the pass, Israel were faced with the descent into Europe. On the way down, they would leave behind them the mountain named Zion, a mountain which has always been known as such, and which has given its name to a village now situated in the pass.
Well, here I am in the Dariel Gorge and in the village of Zion, where I'm perched rather precariously on the cliffs above the river. It was on this exact spot that the figure that can be seen in the photograph taken by Colonel Pierce all those years ago can be seen, showing Mount Zion in the background.
In another article written for the National Message magazine in 1946, Brigadier General Sir Standish Crawford, on a journey through the pass, observed that the Russian car driver is a fatalist, and in Tsarist days it was not an uncommon sight, on looking over a bend in the cliff, to see the wreckage of one or more cars in the abyss below until the winter floods washed them away. It is this abrupt descent by the Argarva River which is known locally as the Gate of Israel. The second book of Esdras also describes how the migration of the Lost Tribes continued for a further year and a half before settling on the fertile lands around the Black Sea, a region which acquired a name that became synonymous with wandering tribes, Scythia. Although numerous Scythian burials have been found in southern Russia, the earliest were found at Kalermes in the Caucasus and Sakis in what is now northwest Iran. This corresponds with evidence found in contemporary Syrian texts and is the same region to which the lost tribes of Israel were deported. The Jewish Encyclopedia outlines several theories as to the fate of the lost tribes, in particular that the identification of the Scythians with the lost tribes is because they appear in history at the same time and very nearly in the same place as the Israelites removed by Shalmaneser. Another people related to the Scythians were the Cimmerians, who have also been identified as descendants of Israel's lost tribes.
The 5th century BC Greek historian Herodotus records how the Cimmerian people once occupied a region north of the Caucasus in what is now Ukraine and southern Russia. However, since archaeologists discovered the royal archives of Assyria and all the cuneiform inscriptions, we now know that the Cimmerians originated south of the Caucasus, in the very period and the very region where the northern kingdom of Israel were deported and lost from history. Dr. Anne Christensen is a well-respected Danish linguistic expert, and in her book, Who Were the Cimmerians and Where Did They Come From?, published in 1988, she states the obvious conclusion. There is scarcely reason any longer to doubt the exciting and verily astonishing assertion propounded by the students of the 10 tribes, that the Israelites deported from Bethumri of the house of Omri, that is the Israelites, are identical with the Gimera or the Cimmerians of the Assyrian sources. Everything indicates that the Israelite deportees did not vanish from the picture, but that abroad and under new conditions they continued to leave their mark on history.
The Encyclopedia Britannica tells us that the Cimmerians invaded what is now western Turkey. So, while some of the tribes migrated through the Caucasus and across southern Russia into Europe, others travelled west through what was then Asia Minor to cross here at Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. This is where east meets west. This ancient city occupies a unique location straddling the Bosphorus, the narrow strip of water that separates Asia from Europe. This strategically important location commanded the vital trade and military routes that bridged the continents.
Many armies have passed through here, including those of the Persian king Darius in the 6th century BC, who, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, made a failed attempt to conquer the Scythians. He built a bridge of boats across the Bosphorus before leading his army north to the Danube. In the resulting battle, the Scythian cavalry and archers forced Darius to withdraw back to the Bosphorus, where he retreated into Asia, never again to attempt an invasion of Europe. This event underlined just how important this place was in crossing from one continent to another. The Cimmerians, in continuing their westward trek, would ultimately become known as Gauls and Celts. The 19th century scholar and antiquary, the Reverend Samuel Lysons, in his 1865 book, Our British Ancestors, Who and What Were They?, states that the Cimmerians, seeming to be Gauls or Celts under a different name, it is observable that the Welsh, a Celtic people, still called themselves Cymri. Not only did Old Testament prophets affirm that the lost tribes of Israel would be preserved in their migrations, the New Testament writers also recognized their continued existence and development. The Apostle James addresses his entire epistle to all 12 tribes scattered abroad.
James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting.
The Apostle Peter continues to recognize them as a chosen generation, a royal priesthood and holy nation, and reminds them of the words of the prophet Hosea, that for a while in their Assyrian captivity they ceased to be a people, but are now once again the people of God.
But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvellous light, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy.
Nowhere on its long journey to the Black Sea does the river Danube look more impressive than here at Budapest, the capital city of Hungary. The Danube is the second longest river in Europe, stretching from its estuary in the Black Sea to its source in Germany's Black Forest. Widely regarded as one of the most beautiful cities in Europe, Budapest can trace its roots back to prehistoric times. It's an intriguing thought, as some scholars have suggested, that the Israelite tribe of Dan incorporated their name into some of the geographical features they encountered on their travels. Starting with Tel Dan in Israel, and in the course of their migrations, the great rivers, the Dnieper, the Don, or even the Danube. Running through the heart of the continent, the Danube has provided a readily available route for armies and all manner of travelers over many centuries. including the lost tribes as they moved westward across the continent. Heroes Square bears testimony to Hungary's turbulent past, with the 7 mounted horsemen representing the chieftains of the Magyar tribes who founded the Hungarian people in the 9th century.
If it is the case that the lost tribes of our story are represented by the Scythians, their presence in the region of the Danube is recorded by an impressive collection of artifacts held here in the Hungarian National Museum.
The Scythians built enormous burial mounds above their princes' graves and buried their dead with exquisite golden objects. Their precious metalwork was the zenith of nomadic art. This exhibition displays some of the most significant relics of Scythian art and culture and tells us something of the daily life of these people. The Scythians were renowned not only for their military prowess, but for their advanced culture and craftsmanship skills. They also developed organized communities and a sophisticated network of trading relationships, particularly with the aspiring Greek city-states. The Danube was to provide the artery that would take the Scythian tribes into the heart of Europe. By the 6th century BC, successive waves of Scythian attacks overtook much of pre-Roman Iron Age Poland and Germany. In the years since the end of the Cold War, what was East Berlin has undergone an extensive restoration program. The Brandenburg Gate is the architectural icon, not just for the city itself, but for the German people. The city centre has been returned to its former grandeur. Nowhere is this reconstruction more apparent than on this small island in the River Spree, on which stand the country's great museums. They hold many priceless archaeological artifacts, including those which tell us something of the Scythian presence in Europe. While the Scythian invasions were accompanied by much violence, there was another, more sophisticated side to their culture. In 1882, a hoard of Scythian treasure was found at the Iron Age archaeological site of Wetterschwelt on the German-Polish border. Some of the wonderful gold objects found there are on display here at the Altes Museum. Taking pride of place in the collection is this golden fish and sword found at Witoskowo. The exquisite craftsmanship of these items bear testimony to the advanced metalworking skills employed at that time. Historians claim that the Scythians were the ancestors of the Anglo-Saxons who invaded Britain after the Roman withdrawal. The historian Sharon Turner, in his History of the Anglo-Saxons, says, "The Anglo-Saxons, Lowland Scots, Normans, Danes, Norwegians, Swedes, Germans, Dutch, Belgians, Lombards, and Franks have all sprung from that great fountain of the human race, which we have distinguished by the terms Scythian, German, or Gothic." The Roman historian Tacitus and the geographer Ptolemy named the River Elbe in the lower half of the Jutland Peninsula as the places inhabited by the Angles and Saxons before they came to Britain. It's also interesting to note that the British historian Nennius, in his account of the arrival of Hengist and Horsa in England, states that messengers were sent to Scythia for reinforcements. It is therefore possible to trace our Anglo-Saxon ancestors back not only to northern Europe, but to South Russia, and finally to Media, where the Israelites were placed in captivity. In AD 410, the Roman Emperor Honorius withdrew from Britain with his legions, leaving the country at the mercy of invaders from Western Europe.
With the departure of the Romans from Britain in the 5th century AD, the door was left open for the coming of the Anglo-Saxons. One of the first places they landed was here on the east coast of England in what is now the county of Suffolk. Just a short distance from here is the archaeological site at Sutton Hoo, significant as one of the most important historical finds ever made in Britain. It marks the point at which the descendants of the lost tribes arrived on our shores, after a journey that had taken them hundreds of years and thousands of miles.
The site at Sutton Hoo was first excavated in 1938, when the owner of the land, Mrs. Edith May Pretty, determined to find out what, if anything, lay beneath the ancient burial mounds just a short distance from her home. She employed Basil Brown, a Suffolk archaeologist, to undertake a dig on her land. In 1939, he opened 3 of the ancient mounds, and in the largest, discovered the remains of a 90-foot-long Anglo-Saxon burial ship. The use of large iron bolts suggests an earlier British origin, whereas the Angles and Saxons tended to use wooden dowels in their ships. Whichever the case, Basil Brown realized that this was no ordinary burial, but that of a rich and powerful nobleman or king. While much of the rest of the site had been plundered by grave robbers, the greatest prize had eluded them: Anglo-Saxon gold, weapons and ornaments, Byzantine silver and other objects that suggested links with France and Scandinavia. The treasures found at Sutton Hoo are to be seen on display at the British Museum, where this impressive helmet takes pride of place. Other items of significance in the collection include the king's shield and sword. These magnificent silver bowls clearly show the Star of David, which suggest a Middle Eastern connection. Escombe Church in County Durham in the northeast of England is one of the oldest, most complete Saxon churches in Britain. It's still used as a place of worship and is thought to have replaced an even earlier Celtic church. It was built from stones taken from the nearby Roman fort at Binchester and bears witness to the very rapid conversion of the Anglo-Saxons to the Christian faith.
All the other Saxon churches have been utilised as barns or houses. This one has remained practically the same, apart from having a few extra windows put in the 19th century. And it was very important because it was built on a pagan site. Churchyard is round. We've got a sundial on the outside wall, which is 2 pagan gods, the god of the world and the god of the sea, that were worshipped here before Christianity spread.
The native British came to be made up not only of the Cimmerian Celts and Scythian Anglo-Saxons, but also Vikings and Normans. Anthropologists, such as E. A. Freeman of Trinity College, Oxford, in his Origin of the English Nation, describes the native Britons as a union of various tribes of the same stock, which passed over from the old Teutonic mainland to grow up as a new people.
In this film, we've presented the case for the identity of the lost tribes of Israel and their migrations across Asia Minor and Europe from their captivity in Assyria. As predicted by biblical prophets, this brought them to the new promised lands in Europe.
The promises made to their patriarch Jacob are also fulfilled, with further migrations west into America, east into Australasia, north into Canada, and south into Africa. These countries, with their common law, based upon the biblical commandments, have inherited in their heraldry symbols which were once the property of ancient Israel.
In the history and development of their culture, the Anglo-Saxon, Viking and Celtic peoples, along with other Christian nations, have provided missionary workers who have taken the gospel to every part of the globe. Their efforts in providing health care, education and spiritual guidance have improved the lives of millions. Over 2 centuries, the work of the missionaries, however imperfect, remains a powerful witness for the Christian faith throughout the world.